Welcome back to Too Much Popcorn, the movie review podcast where Jimmy and I watch a movie, then we sit down, we talk about the things we liked about it, the highs, the lows. And this week we watched the hit 2023. That's right, this one's a new one. We got a new movie watch.
What could it be?
Do we have a air siren type sound for that? We can't do that. No, that's the crisis mode.
Blah, 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 blah.
Ah, there we go. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. No, wait, no. Blah, 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 blah.
Blah, 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 blah. There we go. There we are.
We watched a new movie, and I'm sure you guys have already seen it. Everybody out there, you've already seen it in the titles. It is Dungeons and Dragons. Honor Among Thieves.
Honor amongst thieves.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's not amongst. It's just among.
Among Us. Yeah.
Among Us?
Yeah,
so
they did a little D&D campaign on a spaceship where one person was the bad guy, and
Hugh Grant. Had to be Hugh Grant. Called it at the beginning.
Obviously, yeah.
He's the, what is it? What are they called? Imposter?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm literally like thinking about, I have to go back 3 years. Impossible. We did. We watched the new Dungeons and Dragons movie. Look at us.
Yeah. We watch new. Hey, if you're out there and you're like, hey, you two don't ever watch any new movies. Well, sometimes we don't, but this time we did. And
we started the podcast with Glass Onion. It like had just come out.
And you know what?
No one should ever say that.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm sorry, everybody out there, but sometimes there's hit movies out there like Agent 47 that are just demanding to be watched.
We are doomed in a sort of hellish time machine that sends us back to weird years like 2015. And we're like, oh my gosh, this new movie, Agent 47, came out and we must watch it. It is new and totally in the radar of everyone.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to hear about it.
I'm coming at y'all with a hot, angry energy that, you know, it's not our fault that we're looking back at these movies, because trust me, there's plenty of other good ones. But hey, if we just made a whole bunch of episodes about good movies, nobody would listen to this. No. So,
well, that's the thing too, is we choose a movie and generally we're not going to know if it's a good movie or not. It could throw us. And our whole sort of deal is deciding whether we want people to watch something or not, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or bad.
Yes.
Doesn't really play into that metric.
Oh yes, because I will recommend a bad movie, as we know,
and we will not recommend bad movies, and we will not recommend, you know, cult or even sort of like beloved movies of that kind. I saw a lot of people out there defending Insomnia as like this like amazing work of just like two actors. Oh my gosh, Robin Williams was so good, and I'm just like, did we watch the same movie? You're talking about Insomnia? Either way, that's a whole nother episode. We're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Amongst Thieves. You got Chris Pine, you got Michelle Rodriguez, you got a whole host of characters and actors and Hugh Grant and all that kind of stuff going on. Oh, is there a little Bradley Cooper in there? Oh, well, so it's just such a good movie. I had such a fun time, and lo and behold, the dorky movie talking guy that I am, I also played Dungeons and Dragons. So I have a connection to this film without even knowing, you know, anything about the plot or characters or what's going on in it. And I go, oh, I know about Hasbro's Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons. one of my favorite intellectual properties. I'm very excited to watch Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves.
That's right. Just a little backstory for everybody. Back in the 60s, there were these two brothers, the Has brothers. They got together. They made
They had more than two brothers. They has other brothers as well.
Has brothers. Yeah, and so they made a mathematical based high fantasy. You can make your own stories game.
Yes. And they called it Wizards and Wyverns.
Yes.
Yes.
And since then...
the Wizards of the Coast stole their whole idea and called it Dungeons and Dragons, and then the Has brothers said, we one day will defeat those evil wizards of the coast and buy back our beautiful intellectual property and steal it and try and make it way worse.
Yes, they cast the most magical spell there ever was, a cease and desist letter.
And the wizards of the coast fled nary and thither and were never seen again. But
yeah,
here we are.
I would say both of us have. I would say you are more consistent playing a tabletop RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm more I've done it here and there, but I do enjoy it, and I enjoy Dungeons and Dragons things. Obviously, the 1995 movie with Jeremy Irons and the rest of the crew. Love that
Incredible.
one. Yeah.
That's a great one.
Absolutely amazing. And, other great Dungeons and Dragons things, video games and lore and podcasts and all that. So, of course.
There is an incredible, I think, original Xbox Dungeons and Dragons sort of top-down, like, gauntlet style. Actually really fun.
Yeah.
Just sort of slasher, beat 'em up, Good stuff.
Yeah. Plus, I don't know if you've heard about this, but nowadays people are taking and doing their whole, games of Dungeons and Dragons and making podcasts out of them.
I've never heard a single podcast.
I actually just listened to one episode the other day and I was like, oh, no, that's not for me. But then I heard this other one. I don't listen
to D&D podcasts at all.
I listened to this other podcast where they took a Dungeons and Dragons book, one of the ones that was actually written by not the original creators, the Has brothers.
Not the Has brothers.
Yeah, but some hack named Gary Gygax. I don't know.
Gerald Gygax, yes.
Yeah. He wrote some books about it, some fanfic. And then these other dorks.
Are we never going to talk about this fucking movie? Is this whole episode a bit that we just never talk about the movie?
Oh, we'll get there. I'm doing a different bit right now.
Don't talk about Gord. That podcast doesn't exist right now. Don't point people to that canon event that has happened in our lives, please. Don't do it.
So what about a sharp gourd being used for stabbing a beholder in the eyeball?
If you get a good enough roll, anything's possible in the world of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And
that's what I can learn from the movie.
I think that was actually one thing that was, it's conveyed differently when you listen to a podcast and they're actually rolling and you see the, number and then they get the effect from it. But I do think this movie did a pretty good job of being like, hey, here's this batshit crazy thing that a player character wants to do. And then, the DM who's unseen in the movie is, allowing it or disallowing it based off the role they got.
Yeah. I think there's a key example of the film doing a really good job of showing the sort of mechanic of chance that is key to, the D20 rolling style of, gameplay of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's it's in one of the later fights. It's the perfect pan moment with Chris Pine. He Toros the dragon statue thing and it goes off into the marketplace and crashes into a bunch of stuff. Easy nat 20 or even 10. You could do it, no problem. The crit 1 is that you look down and you have unwittingly put a little a bit of rope between your feet and get thrown about by the dragon that then runs past you.
Yeah.
So it was a perfect moment to me that just highlighted it feels like the game for a player. Does it feel like, does someone who hasn't played, it just is like a good bit, very funny sort of Chris Pine slapstick? Yes. But also from a my game is broken or rather my mind is broken and I only think in D&D mechanics, that was like, oh, I'm seeing this dice roll played out in real time. And the movie does that so many times you lose count, but it does a really good job of sort of highlighting that it is a game and it is like this thing that exists in this weird realm of you're adapting a tabletop RPG to a movie. And so the movie is called Dungeons and Dragons. But there is no point in the movie where you see kids, Stranger Things style, sitting down at a table, rolling dice, trying to defeat a Gorgon or whatever. And to me, that would be the actual Dungeons and Dragons movie. Like you can't just say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and then you're like in a fantasy world. The truest Dungeons and Dragons movie is like you're an hour in and it literally like takes you out of the fantasy, and it's like these a bunch of kids just like yelling at each other like, you can't seduce the dragon, that's not how the mechanical. And it's like, until that happens, I'll never be satisfied with a Dungeons and Dragons movie. But I understand that a studio absolutely will not produce a movie where that happens because it's insane.
Yeah. Or I stand by that, spoiler alert, this is not how the movie ends, but I stand by that. I think it would have been just absolutely amazing if at the very end of the movie, it cuts back to the Starship Enterprise and it's Captain Kirk who's playing this main character. And Spock brought the game. He's like, hey, I found this, great 21st century game that was made. And, at first Captain Kirk's like, oh, no, that's stupid. But then he realizes he can be a super charismatic weirdo. And
God, if this was like the actual subtitle of the movie is Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, a Star Trek story.
And you know what? I would have been in the theater to go see that because I would have
strap
what
in,
is going on with that? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an element of where, because I play the game, I want there to be a fourth wall breaking sort of situation. Even a character carries around a dice or something, and I see a roll happen in game, but it doesn't have bearing on the story, right? They nod to the game in some way, but this does take the route of a lot of, or possibly, well, we haven't watched all the Dungeons and Dragons movies out there, but maybe one of them does take us into the mind of the actual players. Doubt it. Fully doubt it. This is a full fantasy film. You don't just get normal fantasy concepts like dwarves and hobbits and elves and the Underdark. You also get displacer beasts and mimics and slime cubes and all this crazy, very niche feeling, very specific to Dungeons and Dragons books and key concepts that a player is like, oh, 100% I know what's going on. And then a person looking at it is like, why did the guy dissolve in the cube? I do not like I do not like why this happened.
I'm going to be on the other side of the crowd for that argument, though, that I do enjoy the fact that it didn't break the fourth wall. I think this
and that's
movie,
totally fine.
I think this movie did a good enough job of poking the fourth wall without breaking it. And
True.
And we pointed it out tons of times. Alone, we just talked about the dice rolls and kind of visual aesthetics of dice rolls. But there was also the visual gag with the bridge where you get
True.
You get
he's monologuing about all the traps.
Yeah, and he's explaining exactly how to solve the puzzle, and it's exactly like what a DM would do of all right, guys, here's exactly how you're going to solve this puzzle. And then one character just comes in and absolutely blows it for everybody else.
Well, okay, explain to me why the DM is running this NPC telling the characters
because he knows that his
solution of the puzzle
is so off the rails that he has to railroad them so hard that he actually has to give them the solution to his own puzzle. Because he knows that it's hour 3 of their campaign, their pizza's cold, he needs to get back to his family, and so he's just trying to get them to the next segment so he can pause for the next week's game.
Yes, there is an element to this movie that perfectly nails the players have taken over the story vibe where yes, he immediately destroys the puzzle, and then they're like, actually, we have an item that fixes this, and like gets it back on track. But it's fully like flustered DM being completely taken over by these like extremely good players that just like roll incredibly well and are having a really good time. And it's like everybody's having a fun time. Possibly the DM is not having as good of a time because they're like, I literally spent an hour creating this this dragon bridge puzzle, and you've destroyed it because you stepped on the wrong thing on purpose.
Yeah.
This was not a failed roll. You told your character to fail the puzzle. And yes, there is a fair amount of poking, if not completely breaking, not into into a basement somewhere, but there's the part in the very beginning. Chris Pine is telling his whole backstory, and in the backstory, he looks at the camera and is like, "Is Jonathan like gonna be here like soon though?" And that's like in the past version of himself, and you're like, hey, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I know he's doing it right now, but the fact that he's also saying it in that flashback, pretty good.
Yeah, and there's also like in that dungeon, as we were pointing out, there's the hexagons on the floor, which is, very reminiscent of when you have a player map laid out. Most of the time it's the hexagons. So like I think this movie did a good job of like, obviously there's stuff on the, the very far, we'll call it the right. Don't take it that way, everybody. But
okay, define what you're talking about before we take it there.
So you have Dungeons and Dragons where everybody's got guns and they're in the South. No, it's not that. I'm kidding.
Oh.
No, so you have like the podcast, right? Which are very fourth wall breaking, where you have both like the player characters and,
Gotcha.
the break to the actual people playing. And you see the roles and you see how the stuff lays out.
Yeah.
So we'll say
it plays in podcasts that way because like you have to learn the outcome. It can't just like happen with no dice.
And if everybody was silent, that wouldn't be a good podcast.
Yeah.
So you got, we'll call that, we'll call it the right side. We'll call it the right side. And then you got the left side. And the left side is like the absolute high fantasy movies and TV series and stuff, a la Vox Machina and the other D&D series of movies where it's, just absolute fantasy. There's no real hint to the mechanics. It's just, here's these characters and they're on a fantastical quest and they have to do these things and they do brave things and triumph and hoo-hoo, aha.
You mean like Lord of the Rings?
Never heard of it. What is that?
Who's Liv Tyler?
Does that have Boba Fett? I don't know.
Could be in it.
Could be. I don't know. Never seen it. Maybe we'll have to watch that for an episode.
It's another Star Trek story. Sorry, I forgot to add that.
So you got one side that's absolute high fantasy. You got the other side that's kind of fourth wall breaking, but also including mechanics. And so I think this movie did a good job of like being, I would say, closer to the left, but still kind of in the middle somewhere where it's like a fantasy story where they do brave magical things and blah, 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 blah. But, there's the little hints. So,
I mean, it's not even little hints. It feels like big hints where you're like, I have a coin that can talk to the dead, but I can only ask 5 questions, a la a literal mechanic in the game. And it's goofy and extremely just like irreverent almost, where you're like, oh, I'm not dead. Very Monty Python is just like inserted into the game. And you're like, are we at the Holy Grail quest right now? What happened? How did we get here? But it's not that it comes out of nowhere. There's fully parts in the movie that are basically leading you on this quest at the same time as like Holga really likes potatoes and she's seen eating a potato the very first time you see her. And it becomes her like key thing is that she will kick your ass, eat a potato, throw a potato, something potatoes. And it plays back in this sort of, from a player perspective of D&D, I am delighted because I see my players, I see myself picking something that works in the game or picking something that I think is funny, or like I get an item that makes me fly and I'm like, well, I just do this now. It's something like that where one time Holga's character rolled really well to kill someone with a potato, and now she's like, well, potatoes are my thing now. And that is like each character has their sort of quirk. I don't really know about the tiefling. I guess sort of like her whole vibe is just like the outsider.
It's almost, and let me pitch it to you this way, and I'll make a reference to something some people might have heard of and some people might not have, so just bear with me. But it kind of reminds me of like the Adventure Zone, right? Where you got Clint, who's always doing Zone of Truth because that's his thing, and it's silly and funny. But then you have like the more serious characters. We'll go with like Travis.
Neither of the brothers. But yes, Magnus is like the truest, just like fighter. You know, he has the easiest character to just like fall into.
Yeah, and so he's like, I would say more like the tiefling, where like she's actually playing the game like the way it's meant to be played.
Gotcha.
And not doing the silly things. And she's like, well, I'll use my shape shifting here, and I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll come up with this great idea. And then the other person's just like, I'm gonna throw a potato.
Yeah, and Travis is like, my backstory is my wife was killed at Ravenloft, and you're just like, oh my god. And everyone else is like, I abandoned my family and now I carry around a teen Bible, stuff like that.
Zone of Truth.
It makes sense. So I think there's possibly podcast fans out there, helping write this movie. I think they did a really good job of, like we've been saying, like combining the goofiness of a podcast with the sort of interesting nature of a fantasy film. And I think it goes back to, I don't know if this was something, did we do a Conan episode?
I believe Conan's been on here before. Conan, have you been on here before?
Yeah, I've been on here before. It's me, Conan.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Conan. If we talked about Conan, I don't remember, but there was a goofy arrow in Conan. Remember, it like turned into a snake and he shot it.
Yes.
He shot it and it bit him. It bit the lady.
Yes.
So that's like the key shit that myself, Aaron, I think I can include you in this. Is
absolutely.
We love goofy fantasy shit that when you dream it up in your mind or while playing D&D, it sounds really cool. You're like, you just shot an arrow and it turned into a snake and bit you with venom, and whoa, from 60 feet away, that warlock is crazy cool and imposing. And then you watch it in a movie and you're like, that's funny.
Yeah.
You just point at it and you go, that's really funny. So this movie did a really good job of having a sort of ominous vibe with some of its creature design and locale, but also continuously just being like, we're goofy, we make jokes, and also even the serious characters will like do weird things that don't really make sense, except the wizard lady. I think she fully is just like the baddest bad guy.
Yeah, that was the DM being like, all right, I need one person who's on track, and it's this bad person.
Actually bad character.
Yeah. I do agree with you, and I think we have talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to get into it very much, but I think by now there is a trend that some people out there might start seeing, that we just love when absolute wacko mode goes on in a movie.
Sicko fucking shit, folks.
I love imagination, right? And the one thing I love about movies is that you can harness imagination and put it on a screen for other people to spark their imagination. That's the purpose of movies. And when you have a movie that's the same as everything else, always, all the time, I don't need to watch it, and I won't recommend it because I've already seen it.
But technically it's titled A New Thing and has new actors saying new words. But
when you shoot an arrow that then turns into a snake, I love it. And I was thinking about it this time when I was watching this movie. So they get that magical helm, then he's got to be able to attune with the helm. And so the wizard character has to attune to the helm. And
sorcerer, actually.
Sorry, yes.
He's innately
charisma-based.
magical.
And so he puts it on and he goes into that really cool world where stuff starts getting spaghettified. And I really, really enjoyed that visual effect. And it was so cool because you like look in the background and the mountains are turning into like a lava lamp. Where
Droplet. Yeah.
And the grass in the foreground is getting spaghettified, and like I was like, why don't we get more visuals like this in movies? And I think because this is going to sound so highbrow that I'm going to just smack myself after saying this. But I think the majority of people who go see movies don't want to see stuff that like takes that much mental like capacity to recognize. Like you want to look at something and be like, all right, I can recognize that easily, so I can move on with it. But I love when movies are willing to take that risk to be like, look, that mountain's turning into a lava lamp, and these grass are doing this, and this is doing this, and blah, 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 blah. Like that's
I think it's why we've been drawn to like most Christopher Nolan movies too. Is like Inception was never afraid to just be like, here's a city closing in on itself like a book. Here's the fucking Tesseract in Interstellar. You know, like shit like that.
Yeah,
that is mind-blowingly cool looking, and then also you sort of had to squint at it and go like, what actually am I looking at here for a moment?
Yeah.
And just sort of take a step back.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know, I know I sounded, oh, people can't enjoy movies if they do this. I'm sorry. I don't want it to come off that way.
I just generalizing the population. They just would rather look at their phone.
Yes. You know, I do understand that it's hard to look at stuff like that all the time, but there is a level of enjoyment when a movie is willing to take a risk and do something crazy to be original.
Yeah. And it's tough too, because it's like the big budgets are the things that allow the actually, you know, groundbreaking new stuff to happen. And that's not available to so many people that you don't get something that is so buck wild and crazy and new like so often. But then you do get these sort of gem of a movies like this, or I mean, there are other movies out there, but there's so many cool visual tricks and stuff in this movie, like the portal, even the quick shot of him holding the portal on the back of the painting and it like duplicating into that. I was like, hell yeah, that's what it would look like. Like you just, I know it's conceptually what you did it and it's in the movie, but like that looks like what it would look like. You made it great. And it's sort of stuff like that where, I mean, damn, we got to do an episode of fucking Last Jedi, man.
Oh yeah.
Because like that movie did that so much where you just get like a feast of things to look at and like cool shit that you get to be really excited about, and you'd like hope that the artists and, you know, actors and like people involved with making it are as excited as creating this like new visually stimulating thing that, again, I don't necessarily agree with the generalization that people don't want it. Cause like if we too want it,
there are other people that want it.
There are people that want it. There's, I think, a famous like James Cameron quote where he's like, people were making fun of like Avatar or whatever and saying like, why is the flying sequence this long? And he's like, because I wanted to see it. And James Cameron's like, I wanted to see it. And therefore the logical leap is that other people would also want to see it. And I'm going, James, you fucking did it again. You said words that made so much sense. I wish you could have figured out your podcast stuff, but yeah.
Even let's look at, he's coming into the Zoom call right now. Perfect. Michael, we finally got you back. Michael Bay, thank you for joining us. All right, so we're just about to compliment Transformers one more time. But as always, audio problems again. I thought we got this fixed. I'm so sorry. Okay, he is saying that the reason he loves making the Transformers movie is because he can do wild shit and just go buck wild with it. And you know what?
So horny.
Michael? Yeah. Michael,
he did say Michael so horny in the text.
Okay,
and then he left.
We're hanging up on him.
Yeah,
All right.
he left. Yeah, okay.
So, again, stuff like that, right? You could get buck wild with it. He does it. Jimmy does it. That's Jimmy Cameron.
Jimmy Cams. Yeah.
You know,
we had so many more Zoom conversations after the failed one.
So, you know, they're doing the buck wild stuff, and do it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a movie maker, do something wild. I know that the studios are going to tell you to do something crazy and stick it to the Writers Guild and, you know, put out some bland shit, but like, let them write you a cool script and do something crazy.
The writers, not the studio, not the AI. The studio is.
Yeah. But like, I was, when we were looking at the scene when they were in the Underdark, right? I was pointing out that, like, you know, they could have just had a basic dungeon, but what they do, they put the dungeon on chains. And so
cool.
then you get this, you know, crazy environment where stuff's moving. And it's just like, that's enjoyable. Do
Stuff
more of
is
that.
moving.
Do
Even
yes
before
and.
that, the sort of intro into the Underdark is they go into the orifice. They're through this like cool, you know, sort of bioluminescent cave, and it's all these sort of like spores and stuff like that. And then it opens up on this huge Underdark like landscape, and it gives you so much detail in such a like 1 second shot where you're just like, I just want to know so much more about the thing. And it's like, well, that's where you can have adventures if you play D&D.
Yeah.
You know, but the fact that there's so much care and detail put into this sort of like in-world place. And the one thing that was funny is anytime they were like going to Neverwinter, it was like there was the castle and like the huge thing was just always there in whatever background. They're like, we're near Neverwinter, remember? And it's just like always CG'd in the background. And they're like, we're going away from Neverwinter. Look, it's back there.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I get it. Well, I guess I'm immersed in this fantasy world now. Yeah. But yeah, it was totally a feast for the eyes. And it's so quick where you're just like, well, I got the new thing. And then, oh, there's intellect devours. Oh God, what's happening? What are those? Yeah, it was so rapid fire. I would love to see like the concepts and like what the writers were up to for this movie, because it must have been a blast. They basically probably just like, we should probably just play D&D and see what happens, and then write it into a movie if it's good, and then they did. And
even before they get to the Underdark, they're going through that forest where you have the like red moss.
Oh yeah, and the spiders and shit. It's fucking cool.
Yeah, and they did a very good job of like, hey, look at this. We're not gonna explain it though.
No,
just eat it up, and you're like, yes.
But the funny thing about that is it's not the most visually interesting, but it's cool enough and fantasy enough where you're like, sure,
yeah,
fine,
give it to me.
Yeah,
why not?
I'll take it.
Yeah,
I will not take it. Don't just put me in a regular forest.
I think the movie also did a good job of, for some stuff, you know, they were like, all right, here's this D&D high fantasy thing, and, you know, we're going to say the name of it, and then we're going to explain it and how it works. And you're like, okay, yeah. I didn't need to know that,
spells.
But probably some people needed to know that.
Yeah.
But then there was also other times, like in the arena, when they're, you know, fighting in the arena, they're like, there's this gelatinous cube. You don't know how it works? Oh, well, that's just, you know, accept it. And then, you know, they're like, hey, here's a mimic. You don't know how it works? Accept it. And you're like, okay.
Yep.
And so there were other times where it was like, all right, you know, here's a high fantasy thing. Look at it. Enjoy it. And you're like, cool. All right.
Are there other things we need to accept in this life, Aaron? Such as advertisements?
I think we do need to. And I think everybody out there has to accept the advertisements.
And we don't want to.
Because look, hot take alert, there's a 15-second skip button, and you can use it to go through the ads. So we'll cut to those ads, and you can use that 15-second skip button.
Or don't.
Or don't. Listen to them.
You. All right, we'll hit those ads. We're back.
Yes, I've been on a magical quest with Conan the Barbarian, and now I'm a high fantasy lad. Ha-ha!
Did you get like a cool item from or something? Or?
I got many cool items, like this stone of far speech. You can't see it, but
Oh, and the feedback.
It's too close. Sorry.
Sorry, can take it away from the microphone. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Oh, let's see. Let me look at my bag of holding.
Oh, did you get that?
Yeah, that was actually the only other thing. It was so I just have the bag of holding now.
Oh, you just have stuff in the bag of holding.
Oh, it's only the stone of far speech. It's only the two things. Yeah,
but it can hold so much, and you just put the bag. You just put it.
The rest of the players, they were like, "Hey, we're gonna take all the loot," and I was like, "Well, please don't." And then I failed my charisma check, so you know.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
I'm with this fantasy lad now. He's gone to the city of Neverwinter on the continent in the world of Faerun. I don't know. The movie steeps itself very deeply in the D&D lore, but they not only that, it's just funny because it's definitely actors saying, I have to say what now? Baldur's Gate? Stuff like that, where you're like, just name drop as many things as possible to steep your characters in this thing and then get out because we got to get out.
Yes, I do think it quite made me remember of the first Dungeons and Dragons movie, where they wrote in many things where they were like, look, we don't know much about the lore, but what we do know is how to look up things about the lore and then just put them in there. So, there were many times that they would reference my hometown of the Sword Coast and be like, haha, we've been to the Sword Coast. And you're like, I've done a campaign too where I have been to the Sword Coast.
There are many adventures centered around the Sword Coast and the surrounding areas.
Yeah. And so, it makes me think of other... Hey, what are you doing? Get out of here. Sorry, guys, I'm back.
That guy looked just like you.
Yeah, he was a shapeshifter.
He was in armor, though. Like a full-clad armor.
I know he makes it, and like that was the thing. It was kind of like scratching when he was standing. So I can only imagine it was bad audio.
Probably bad audio. Yeah.
I think he was talking. You guys were talking about referencing things and making that enjoyable. Yeah, I do find that kind of a funny concept in movies where they're like, all right, we have this thing that's lore heavy and we want to be relatable to people. So we're just going to name the things and everybody's going to eat it up because they're going to be like, oh, yeah, I've heard that thing and I like it.
Baldur's Gate.
Gate.
That game just came out.
Yes, you can romance people. And so, it's kind of funny because it's like that.
Guess what, though? You know what's better? Just doing that is better than whatever the fuck was happening in the fucking Hitman movie where they were like not referencing anything, trying to be their own thing and just whatever was happening. It's better when at least something happens.
Yes. And it makes the rest of the lore, I think, easier to swallow too, where you start getting in the Red Wizards of Theun and you're like, okay, I don't actually know if that one's a real thing, Mr. Gygax or the Has brothers put down.
Yeah.
But, they said Sword Coast right before it, and then they said Red Wizards of Theun.
Gotta take it.
I'm going to take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
take it.
I think that is a good thing that some writers are doing. Sorry, that's how it was written down on my script. I tried to give that line as best I could.
Your writer just went on strike.
Yeah.
In your own brain.
Yeah, my scabs aren't scabbing for me anymore.
Yeah, your writers just unionized. They just formed a new union, a brain union, and it's not including yourself. Either way, yeah, it was funny to hear Hugh Grant expound upon, I have the two richest men from Waterdeep and this other place, pretty funny to just have Hugh Grant be this very fantasy swindler. And to be fair, the amount that he was in the movie was, I think, the perfect amount. Because I think he inherently is an annoying man. And so this character that he played was also like, ooh, such a swindler kind of guy. I really don't like him. And so you put him in the movie and you go, ooh, I hope he gets his goat someday. And then, but like in a bad way, like he's butted by a goat. I don't know. Is get a goat? Do you want a goat? Either way. And so he's on screen enough where you're like, oh, I really don't like him, but he's not as evil as this red witch. And then he gets his goat and she gets her goat and everybody gets their goats. And
there's a lot of goats in this movie.
A lot of goats.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good. I like what they did with most characters. No, I'm not going to. There's no character I didn't like. No.
Okay. Yeah.
There's no one.
No, and I think I think this is one of those movies where each character was written differently and well in their own way, such that not every character had to be the funny character, right? You have one that's kind of like, oh, I'm unsure about myself, and one that's like, well, I'm just here, and then, the charismatic one, and then the barbarian. And
the perfect party.
That again does very well to, speaking of like different players playing different people. looking at it as a player character, not actors. But it worked.
Because they aren't actors.
And we know that one of my big pet peeves is when all characters in a movie are just the same person.
Yeah.
And I think, too, when you're looking at, Hugh Grant's character, you're like, okay, so they're starting out the movie with Hugh Grant and their party. And how is he going to be any different than Chris Pine?
A lot of Chris.
Got a lot of Chris Pratt on my mind.
Rattling around.
How's it going to be
around.
any different than Chris Pine? And you're like, I'm not so sure about this. But then, stuff happens. He leaves their party and he's not around in the movie as much. And you're like, okay, good. Now I can see how Chris Pine's character can take the lead and be the lead character in this.
I think Chris Pine did a phenomenal job in this role. And I think it was a more complex role than I was expecting based on the sort of trailers and how the movie was presented to me. Because I see Honor Among Thieves. I go, okay, everybody's a thief. Interesting choice. But not only do they make Chris Pine like an oathbreaker, paladin, thief, bard, it's like he has his own vibe. He's just like his own class of character that is like planner, like plan making. He's got his ledger out and he's planning all this stuff. And it's not necessarily like a D&D class in the game or whatever, but it's funny to think of him as like the character that is always trying to push the party in another way. And he doesn't always make everyone agree, but when he makes everyone agree, everybody has the best time, including the people who are like running the game or any character, And that's what then as the audience you're brought along on this sort of guy who's trying to get the good vibes, but he keeps getting, pushed around and he keeps taking the L's. And that's Chris Pine in this character, in this role. It's fantastic. He has a like devastating backstory with like a wife murder and like all this sort of stuff. And it establishes the red wizard's knives that are magical and overpowered and probably shouldn't be nerfed in a campaign. Let's just be real. But, yeah, it's totally this weird thing where he had such an impactful role where I was like, he's just a bard, right? He has the loot and he's just a bard. He can't be this whole thing. And then he's like, Oathbreaker Paladin. Also, I'm a thief and I do all this other stuff. And it totally surprised me because I was like, man, Chris Pine's cool as hell in this movie. I loved it. He wears a goofy outfit. He just gets to do fun stuff.
Yeah.
Fun to watch.
Hot take alert. I love Chris Pine. He's possibly my favorite Chris. I don't know. But he's up there. He's great. And I agree. I think, from what I was expecting going into this movie, I was like, oh, he's just going to be the charisma guy. And he's going to be charisma and funny and
he's going to be horny.
Jokey jokes. It's all going to be jokes. It's just Marvel. But they did a good job of being like, hey, he's Captain Kirk, but in fantasy time. And you're like, I'll take it. I'll fucking take it.
Where's our Spock when we need it? It's Holga.
I was going to say, I think the thing I thought the first time was, I think when you're looking at like who each person was playing on the Starship Enterprise as these characters.
Only you are doing this.
I know. My fourth wall of nerd within nerd was like, okay, so if the Star Trek Enterprise was playing Dungeons and Dragons.
You'll only watch a movie if it has relations to Star Trek canon.
Now you know my shame. But yeah, I kept thinking like, hey, I think, Spock was like, I think it'd be quite interesting to play a person with low intelligence and high strength. And so he played Holga, and as a person on the Star Trek Enterprise, he's not a very charismatic guy.
Don't you love it in Agent 47 Hitman game where Hitman goes, "Beam me up, Hitman."
Well, everybody knows that was actually played by Scotty while he was down in the reactor.
It is funny. We should try and find a movie with like Shaun of the Dead guy in it for the next one, since we got Quinto in the last one. We got Pine in this one.
Oh my gosh.
Let's go down the list.
Let's do it. Let's get Simon Pegg.
Let's get Simon Pegg in here. He's in the Mission Impossible, right? That'll be streaming soon.
We can watch that.
There we go.
Yeah. So
either way.
Yeah. Jimmy, what did you think? What did you think of Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, 2023?
Honor Amongst Thieves.
The ultimate question, would you recommend this to people? Would you tell people to take, what was it, an hour, 58 minutes of their life and watch this movie?
Kind of long movie. Not gonna lie.
I think it might have been shorter. I don't know. We don't prep. Y'all,
No.
You're out there. We don't prep. You're here.
The prep is we learn when the movie came out. What
That's
year?
about it. I don't even learn all the actors' names. I know Chris Pine. That was 80 Yard Later. And then Michelle Rodriguez. And then Hugh
Justice Smith,
Yeah.
I think, is the guy from Detective Pikachu.
Grant. Oh yeah.
Yeah, same guy. Okay, let's see here. So, and the wizard lady she's in like Netflix stuff. I saw her in like Shadow and Bone, but she wasn't bald in that one. So totally different role. Let's see here. We got Dungeons and Dragons. We got me, a guy who plays Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletops a lot. So much so that it's always on my mind and I can't stop thinking about it, and it hurts me, and and it's a social game, but also it hurts me to play. It is an energy sink. But
Doing
here we are watching a movie.
damage every day.
Yes, I take psychic damage just by submitting myself to the hobby of doing it, because I'm constantly thinking about new stuff to put my players through, and not just like dangers and strifes, but like fun stuff, like, maybe they'll encounter a fun subterranean sect of cursed people that are cursed by the Shadowfell, and they'll have... Either way, I'm getting ahead of myself. Dungeons and Dragons movie, it's good. I really liked it. There's a concept here that I hope the writers don't necessarily take Chris Pine saying, that next adventure where we have to save the country from that wizard guy, evil lich guy. I hope that next movie, wink, wink, when we do that will be what a crazy adventure we'll have with all of my friends, the tiefling and the sorcerer and all my friends. So my concept for this rather wouldn't be ditch all these people. We love them. They're great, fantastic. We've seen them now. They can maybe do their own thing in a second movie if you want to, but before you make a second movie with them, make another Dungeons and Dragons movie with a completely different main cast. Do a Chris Evans. Why not? Do a different Chris. Do somebody else. They're a different party makeup. Have your writers run through another campaign, figure out what works in that one, write it out. I don't know if that's the actual process for writing this movie. I would hope that some Dungeons and Dragons was played, though, right?
Hot take alert. Hold on. Hot take alert. Yes, I'm 100% with you. Hot take alert. 4 Dungeons and Dragons movies, a quadrilogy, one with a different leading Chris each time in a different, and not even like each one has to be the charismatic bard, but like they get to play different classes. And so you get Evans, who's it like actually like, dude, Chris Evans as a buff ass fucking wizard.
Or like a monk or something. Yeah, just like fucking do something.
Yeah. And then like get Hemsworth as like a absolute hulking big sneaky guy. I would love to watch that.
Amazing. Pratt the Warlock, obviously.
Yes.
So that is my concept for this, and I hope they do that because I would love to see other leading characters. I think I think everyone in this movie was great. I just would love to see a different cast run through another D&D thing. They're not in Neverwinter in this next movie. They're somewhere else. They're in Waterdeep. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Another world-ending catastrophe is happening. And they get to solve it through their own way and their own NPCs. They interact and stuff with that. So I would love for that to happen. I'll take the sequel if they make another one with Chris Pine and everybody else, but I don't think it will. It's not what I really want. So it's sort of like, it's the flip of the coin. It's the devil's advocate sort of situation where you'd be like, I'd be really happy to get more Dungeons and Dragons lore and movies and stuff like that. I love seeing it enter the sort of zeitgeist in the way that it has. But for this movie specifically, I'm going to say it's a not watch.
Whoa!
I devastatingly liked it so much, but there was just something clawing at the back of my head that goes, I don't really need anyone else to see it. It can be mine. It can be yours. It can be whoever wants to watch it. I'm not going to recommend it to people. I thought it was a little too long. I thought the funny parts were a little too segmented, as if they were a Monty Python bit that then like cut away to something else. And then when it's fully involved in the story, I think it's fantastic. It's really well written. But I'd rather just like do a goofy thing the whole time or do a serious thing the whole time. I get it. I just want the fourth wall breaking to be so hard that you crash into somebody's basement and Chris Pine's literally there like, okay, so what do I have to do? Seduce Hugh Grant? And Hugh Grant's like, I can't be seduced. You know, stuff like that. So either way, that's my final thing. I'm going to say it's a not watch for me. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely will get to that, but I'm hooked on this idea that you've pitched about the sequel, and it's encapsulated me, and I'm stuck in it now.
So see, I almost told you about it when we were watching the movie, and I said, no.
This would be a good thing to talk
little
about.
Nugget.
Yeah. Oh, because no, you're absolutely right. And I think it's something that more movies need to do, where the sequel it plays off of the first one, but goes bigger and harder and wilder. And
it's not Honor Among Thieves 2. It's the next Dungeons and Dragons movie.
And it's something that Star Wars has critically failed into just brutally nowadays, where every fucking Star Wars anything ends up on Tatooine. And I hate it. I hate it so much. I'm looking at you, Book of Boba Fett. Hot take alert, but Book of Boba Fett. But yes, you have an infinite galaxy of weird ass monsters and weird ass planets and starships that can go to each thing, and you're gonna keep putting me on Tatooine. So you know what?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Star Trek for a second.
Star Trek doesn't do it. So Dungeons and Dragons do the same thing. And you know what? In the next one, I don't even want them going to Waterdeep, because Waterdeep is too similar to Neverwinter. I want them, I don't even know where.
Go to the fucking Feywilds, dude.
Yeah.
Do a Feywilds movie.
Go crazy with it. I wouldn't say, 10 out of 10 crazy with this one. I'd say you guys did like a nice 7 out of 10. Like, here's some crazy stuff, but it's still kind of acceptable and palpable to most people. Take it up to 8 for the next one, and then 9, and then 10. And then, that's perfect for the quadrilogy of Chris's. It's going to be perfect. So, point being made, I just want more sequels to be cooler and for Star Wars to stop going to Tatooine.
Stop talking about Star Wars.
So,
we can only talk about one star-based series at a time.
And it's Star Trek, the superior Book of Boba Fett based.
Yes.
All right. So, Dungeons and Dragons, what do I think about it? Should I recommend this to people? Would I recommend this to people? Will I recommend this to people? Yeah, I will. I liked it. I liked it a lot. In fact, there are 4 main bits in this movie that I enjoy so much that when I saw them again this time, I was like, yes, I am looking forward to seeing these bits again. And I watched them and I was like, ha ha ha, ha. Those are enjoyable.
A guffaw.
Oh, yes. And, they're 4 very good bits. And if you're out there, I would love to see you watch this movie. Put it in the comments. What do you think my 4 top bits are from this movie? And if you get them...
We didn't even talk about the J-Man.
Oh, no. No, we
can't believe we didn't talk about him. And we're not going to.
No.
At this point.
I know.
At this stage.
So, guess at the bits, and if you get them right, we'll give you a shout out. I will shout out anything. Put that in the comments too. Say, Aaron, I want you to shout this, and as long as it's not racist, I will shout it. But yeah,
if it's bigoted or anything else, he'll shout it. He'll shout it to the heavens.
I will shout about you, and I will cancel you.
As long as it's not racist, it can be bigoted. It can be wrong.
This movie was fun, and more movies, especially in fantasy worlds, need to be fun. And a lot of movies have become bland, like we talk about, and especially fantasy movies. It's like, all right, this fantasy movie is a lot like this fantasy movie, and okay, they're talking about
terrible one. Jason Momoa was Conan. I think it was the Jason Momoa.
Oh
Conan.
yeah.
That one was so bad, dude.
See, haven't seen that one and probably won't
no.
because. But yeah, and stuff even like Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones is bland to me because it's exactly everything else. It's not crazy. It's not cool. It is everything else. Oh, I don't care about the political intrigue because you know what? That's just regular politics. It's all the same thing. But when you start doing funny stuff and start having funny mechanics, and I'm not saying everything in the movie needs to be funny, I'm just saying fun. I should say fun rather than funny. When your stuff is
Original feeling, like a
Yes.
dash of originality. You just are sort of looking for that new concept.
that chutzpah, you know? And this movie had it. And so, you know, it even made me think of like the first Dungeons and Dragons movie where you're like, this movie's bad, but like it's kind of interesting and has some, you know, come on, man. They did like an army of dragons at the very end. And
It was so bad. It was so bad.
yeah. But
And that one specifically, the first one with Jeremy Irons, I specifically remember, or rather vaguely remember, that they don't even talk about Dungeons and Dragons stuff at all.
yeah,
They're
no.
just like, we slapped Dungeons and Dragons on this fantasy movie with Jeremy Irons that we made.
yeah.
And also there's dragons in it.
So, you know, I enjoyed this movie for being original, being something different, and I would recommend that to people. If you got the time to watch a movie and you want to watch something that will make you guffaw and something that you'll be like, oh wow, that was interesting and this was different and this activated my brain in different ways. And the visuals are cool. You know, go watch it. So
Yeah.
we got a crisis mode.
We have a crisis mode. The thing with my choice here is I so vividly would be excited for more sequels of this if they go in the right direction. I want more. I want it to go in this direction. I just think that this was a sort of not a false start in terms of like it's not bad. It's not a bad movie at all. I just am done with it. I think I would rather see the next things that come from the people involved with making it. And hopefully we get more D&D stuff because I desperately want to see those sequels with the other Chris's. If they make another Honor Amongst Thieves, that's fine. I'm not gonna be as hyped for it, but if we get more stuff that delves into Baldur's Gate or leaves Faerun entirely and goes to the astral plane and they do Spelljammer adventures on ships and you get like a pirate space adventure, shit like that exists fully in the canon and like add-ons of Dungeons and Dragons, and you can run it base anyway. You could just go crazy with planar stuff. I just want it to exist because it's part of a hobby that I truly, truly enjoy. And so when I see a movie of it that I do also enjoy, I go, that's really good. I'm happy for you, movie. Goodbye. Close the door on the movie. But yeah, crisis mode, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't happen very often, but here we are. It's just how it is. I don't really have anything else to say about the movie.
That's fair.
I did like it. That's the funny thing, is that I'm like, I did like it quite well. I think it's a great movie. I can't say that I will recommend it as a watch, right?
Yeah. And, you know,
Interesting.
again, that's the great thing about our system. Haha, that's the great thing, too, about our podcast.
Great.
No, but, we can put movies on a scale, right? But putting movies on a scale is so arbitrary in a way where it's like, all right, this movie was a 7 out of 10, but I've seen a lot of 7 out of 10s that I would not recommend to people.
Exactly.
And so, I like that you say that this is a good movie, but you wouldn't recommend it to people. That's what we're all about. Find movies that you like, recommend them to people, or don't.
And I like being sort of the bad boy sometimes,
It's
We're like,
easy
I
to
really
do.
like the movie, but I'm going to say, nah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. But that's going to do it, right? For Too Much Popcorn.
I think that's going to do it for this episode.
That's the episode. Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Amongst Thieves, 2023. Man, we watched a new movie and everything. How could we?
How could we?
How could we do this? Either way, ate all the popcorn. I'm so full of the popcorn. I do not feel well. There is that scene where she turns into a rat and then spell is literally like popping corn.
Oh
with
yeah, the
force.
popcorn. Like
Pretty
that.
cool. Fun CG stuff in this movie.
Yeah.
A little. I think that's an element that I didn't talk about, but it's there is an element where there's some like wild CG that doesn't really work for me in terms of like her whole transforming in the city thing, and she like turns into a deer, and then the deer is very CG and it runs off, and I go, ugh.
That's
And
fair.
I think it's fine because it's like a fantasy. She's like a fantasy deer, so she can move in different fantasy ways. But there was something about that sequence that I go, I don't know, nah, and that plays into a little bit, but it barely touches on that. It's hard to explain. Either way, too much popcorn. I'm done talking about the movie. We're done talking about this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have the time to leave a review wherever you're listening, we'd love to see that. Again, so for right now, we are still trying to push for Spotify, get those Spotify listens, get those Spotify ratings in so we can actually get those ads in that we told you that are totally there, and they're totally there, real ads. Either way, that's too much popcorn. Thank you. You've had too much popcorn. I'm Jimmy. That's Aaron. And that's going to do it. Goodbye.
Goodbye. I'm back. Ha ha.
Oh, no.
Hey, get out of here. Bye.